Are you preparing yourself for lots of promises to be made, lots of spending gifts from the government? The budget's just 2 weeks away. 1 minute you think you're going to a federal election. Next thing, that's not going to happen for a bit longer. We're going to do a budget instead. We thought we might want to unpack what to expect over the next few weeks because it will impact all of us. We better call Saul. Saul Eslake is an independent economist and he's here each Tuesday morning. Very good morning to you, Saul.
Good morning, Hamish. Thanks for having me on again.
So is this going to be a budget laden with gifts for us because the government wants to win office again and wants to just make us all feel good and happy and less uncomfortable when we pay all the bills?
I'm tempted to respond like Captain Renault in Casablanca, that I'd be shocked to think that there would be pork barrelling and pre-election spending in a pre-election budget. Of course there will be some. There may not be a huge amount because the Treasurer and the government will no doubt be aware that if there is a lot of new spending in the budget that will add to demand, people are going to say that the Reserve Bank will be more hesitant to cut interest rates any further. The Reserve Bank itself won't say anything during an election campaign. They wouldn't do that. But lots of other people will say that as a result of all this extra spending, you with a big mortgage will have to wait even longer for another cut in interest rates. So they know that. And therefore, I think that while there will inevitably be some more spending, in particular, there'll be another round of energy bill relief, maybe not on quite the same scale as last year and hopefully better targeted than last year's measures were, but there'll be some of that.
But when we spoke to Phil Curry yesterday on Mornings, and he's written about it today actually in the Fin Review, he said that most of the things they were going to do have already been announced, like the Medicare changes, and they may not have much left to offer.
Well, they're bound to have something. I mean, there's a category in the budget papers buried within what's called the contingency reserve, which for the most part is to meet unexpected things. So, for example, the cost to the federal government of providing assistance to victims of the flooding that's occurred and storm damage that's occurred in Queensland and northern New South Wales, that will come out of a provision that's in the contingency reserve in the budget for these sorts of things. But there's also a category for decisions taken but not yet announced. And that's always a bit bigger in budgets in the lead up to election campaigns. So there will be money in there which they'll have already provided. So they'll say it won't add to the budget deficit beyond what it's already forecast to be. And so I'm led to believe a good deal of that $8.5 billion for Medicare, for example, was in that category in the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook that was published just before Christmas last year. But there'll be other things as well, I'm sure.
What do you reckon the chances are that we'll know before the election what the 36,000 jobs are that the coalition would cut if it wins office?
I say in response to questions like that, Hamish, that I've got a better chance of seeing a thylacine on my front lawn of a morning. They are not going to spell out where those cuts are going to be. Mr. Dutton has said that, of course, the government will, a coalition government, if it's elected, will cut spending, but we'll decide where we'll cut spending after we've been elected, rather than tell you beforehand. And I think they will take the same approach to the 36,000 public servants. The government...
Is there some merit in that? Like often when you're in opposition, you don't have as good a line of sight of what fat there is to cut.
Well, that's why we have a parliamentary budget office, which was established in 2012, is that they are meant to help oppositions and minor parties cost policies. And if the coalition was serious about this, they would have asked the Parliamentary Budget Office for advice. And in due course, while they may not release it until the election campaign, in due course they would release their policies and the costings that the PBO have done of those policies. Now, they may do that. I mean, obviously the election hasn't been called yet, and there's plenty of time between now and whenever in May the election will be called for the coalition to come a bit cleaner than they have done so far about what they intend to do. But to say to the Australian people, we're going to make big budget spending cuts, we're going to cut waste and extravagance, maybe we're going to have our own bunch of musketeers to do that for us. To say that, but we're not going to tell you how much and we're not going to tell you where, is, I think, treating the electorate with a fair amount of contempt.
Okay. I'm talking to Saul Eslake. It's 17 minutes to 10. We've been talking to Malcolm Turnbull this morning. He's locked in a verbal war with Donald Trump. But clearly at the centre of this is the issue of tariffs. They're due to come in on Thursday. Is it, has Australia left it too late to get an exemption? It doesn't really look like anything's happening. Peter Dutton's saying this morning, actually, Anthony Albanese's just got to get on the phone to Trump and do a deal. Is that even possible in your mind?
Well, I think the government has done all that it reasonably could to present the same arguments that Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison did when they were Prime Ministers.
But Turnbull's saying you've got to make different arguments because it's a different set of people. They're more strident in their views in the United States now, and that actually Trump regrets having given an exemption last time.
And that may well be so, in which case, what else can they say? My view is this, that if we are going to be hit with tariffs, first of all, we shouldn't be stupid and respond by forcing Australians to pay higher things imported from the United States. We didn't do that when China... Which is what would happen
if we place tariffs on in response.
Correct. We would be, we'd be saying, as I think I said this to you once before, when I was a kid, my mum used to say, just because your sister puts her head down the toilet doesn't mean that you should do it too. That would be what imposing retaliatory tariffs would be punishing Australians because the Americans do something stupid to themselves. Yeah. But what I think they should do is publicly declare that this is an unfriendly act. Capital U, capital A, this is an unfriendly act that you would not expect to be directed towards one of the very few nations that the US runs a trade surplus with, that is the recipient of what is in effect Australian foreign aid under the AUKUS Treaty, and which is the only country in the world that has fought alongside Americans in every war the Americans have been in since 2017. We are not, as J.D. Vance so rudely said of Britain and France, some random nation that hasn't fought in a war in 30 or 40 years. We are America's staunchest ally. And while I don't think ministers should say this, what I would say is they should arrange for some backbencher to ask, how much rent is Australia charging the United States for its military facilities in Australia, like Pine Gap, Narungga, Exmouth, which play crucial roles in, for example, the operations of the US Pacific Fleet? That's the sort of thing Trump understands. Are we charging the Americans an appropriate amount of rent for all the services that we provide to them, which they couldn't do without?
Put it on the table.
Well, I'm not saying, it would not be in Australia's interest to boot them out. They play an important role in Australia's security as well. But are we being, as Trump would say, dudded by the Americans by giving them all this stuff, potentially making us a target for attacks by, passing Chinese ships in the event of a military conflict opening up? Are we getting an appropriate recompense? In that sense, again, to use Trump speak, maybe we actually do have some cards. And perhaps we could say, if you keep being as unfriendly to your staunchest ally as you now are being, then we might play those cards. And, from Mr. Albanese's and Mr. Dr. Chalmers' perspective, they might care to note what standing up to Trump's bullying has done for the popularity of their counterparts in Canada, who were odds on to get slaughtered at the Canadian election that might be held at a similar time now to the Australian one. But now, Trudeau has regained much of the standing that he had lost, and his successor, Mark Carney, despite having no political experience at all, might actually win an election that his party was previously forecast to get slaughtered in. That there are votes to be had in standing up to this bullying by Donald Trump and his toadies.
Saul Eslake, before we let you go, very important question this morning. Are you a Kylie man? Kylie Minogue?
Not especially. There are some of her songs I like, but Locomotion, for example, was a cover version that had been done a couple of times before. And, as is often the case with covers, unless they're covers of Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen songs, usually the originals are better.
Everybody's doing a brand new dance now. Come on, baby.
So you reckon that one's better, Saul?
I would think so, but I'm probably showing my age, Hamish.
Saul Eslake, thank you very much.